extra time.
পরীক্ষায় no tension, no হয়রানি, all is well with ছায়া প্রকাশনী।
ছায়া প্রকাশনী।
Hello and welcome to the Extra Time Football Show. This is your very own Suman Chakrabarti, and tomorrow once again there'll be a cracker of a contest as Brazil will be taking on mighty England in the first semi-final of the 2017 FIFA U17 World Cup. And alongside me is none other than the great John Helm, great football commentator and a magnificent football analyst. We all know him. John, once again welcome to the show, and tomorrow, what do you think? How big a game would this be in the context of the FIFA U17 World Cup?
Well, what a match. I mean, I think you asked the question actually about the two best attacking sides in the whole of the World Cup, and the statistics just about bear that up. England have scored 15 times, Brazil have scored 11. OK, Mali have got 15 and France have got 15 as well. But I think most people would agree the two best, most exciting, most adventurous teams are England and Brazil.
Okay. John, England was, to be honest, very much struggling if it comes in terms of scoring goals against Japan, as we all know. Might be because of the reasons that Jadon Sancho was very much absent, to be precise, if it comes in terms of his influence. So what do you think? Brewster scored a brace against, in the last game, to be precise. Would that be a big help if it comes in terms of the moral perspective?
Well, Brewster got a hat-trick, actually. He's now got 4 goals in the tournament, and the goals have been spread around by England. I think in the Japan game, they got a little frustrated early on. Japan, let's face it, had great technique on that occasion and played the game to perfection for 70 minutes, and they were coming off the back of a really poor performance against New Caledonia and had to respond. And late on, Kubo was excellent. They had 2 or 3 players who came into the game and made England look quite ordinary. That's the only time England have looked ordinary. And what I've noticed about every game that they've played apart from that one, they've struck like a rattlesnake early. They've got goals in the 5th minute, in the 6th minute, in the 10th minute, in the 19th minute, in the 20th minute. They come out like a greyhound out of the traps, and I think that's what they'll try to do again. They are a very exciting side. Those goals for Brewster psychologically will have helped him immensely, because he was struggling a little bit earlier in the tournament. He's not struggling anymore. The goals can come from anybody, but you might say the same about Brazil.
What do you think about the Brazil side? Because before the Brazil versus Germany game and the show, you told that you cannot predict against Germany, but they showed great characters. We all knew that the Germans are known for coming from behind and all that, but Brazil showed that in the previous game, isn't it?
Hats off to the Brazilian coach. He did a brilliant job, because at half-time he realised he'd made a poor selection. Not blaming him for that. He decided to change his left-back, and he'd taken out Weverson, and he'd played Luan Candido at left-back, who was clearly out of his depth. It's not often I say on a commentary that a player is struggling, but he really was struggling. And the coach had the guts to make the change at half-time, and how it paid dividends. Suddenly they started putting the passes together. 10 minutes into the second half, Allen became more of an influential figure, and it was Weverson who came up with a fabulous goal. Why it is I do not know, but when the ball hits the net off the underside of the crossbar, it's so spectacular. And then within 6 minutes, they of course had the lead through Paulinho. And it changed the whole mood. The crowd at Salt Lake was fantastic. Really they lifted the roof off. The noise was fabulous. It really was. Brazil are a very, very good side. Make no mistake, they've been in trouble twice in the tournament. They were behind against Spain. Now they've been behind in this last game against Germany. And each time they've had the fortitude to come back and overturn the misfortune. In the other games, they coasted. They won them all 2-0, 3-0, and just did enough. But we saw the real Brazil in that last half an hour against Germany.
In big competitions like a FIFA World Cup, whatever the age group is, whether it's senior or any youth group to be precise, game changers are always important in such big games. So what do you think, who can be the game changers on tomorrow's game on both the teams' perspectives?
Midfield is important, there is no question about that. Pace is going to be important, and strangely, I actually feel as though England have a bit more pace than Brazil. Now, that is unusual, but Hudson-Odoi is rapid down the left-hand side. Brewster has shown his strength and his pace in the centre for England as well. And for me, one of the players of the tournament is Foden. I think he's got beautiful footballing feet. He led on the first 2 goals against US for Brewster. Brazil rely more on the close passing game, the 1-2s between Allen and Paulinho, and the little midfielder, number 8, I forget his name for the minute now, but they have got good players, there's no question about that, but they prefer the quick interpassing. England rely more on the pace, the ball through or the ball over the top and pace to get in. So I think the game changer will be whichever of those gets the tactics right. It's going to be a tactical battle between the two coaches, two very intelligent coaches who talk really well about the game. It'll be a very close game and it will be down to very fine margins.
John, I mean, you're in English to be precise, and you have been following the English football for the last 30 years, as we were discussing just a few minutes back. According to you, what has been the main difference between the other English sides which you have seen over the years and this particular English side which has been playing in this FIFA U17 World Cup?
Very good question. Attitude, totally. Togetherness, totally. A will to win, totally. And what has happened is that there is now willingness on behalf of the top coaches in England, albeit many of them foreigners like Guardiola, like Conte, like Mourinho, to let the best young players develop by coming to tournaments that are played abroad. Even 5 years ago, the majority of England football coaches and managers didn't want their young players competing in the under-17s and under-20 World Cups. And I used to say that's such a backward move, you know, a regressive step that we did regret. And now all of a sudden there's a change in mood and they're happy for their youngsters to come and play in the under-20s, in the under-17s, which is why England won in Korea this year at under-20 level and why they're now in the under-17 semi-final and maybe final as well. They also did well in the under-19s in Europe this year. But the players have bought into it. And I'm sure you heard the comment made by Steve Cooper during the press conference that they now all play the same way from under 15 to under 16 to under 17 to under 20, so that if a player is developing properly, he will move on and into the next level.
As we were discussing, and we have heard in the press conference as well, that the Brazilian coach as well as Mr. Steve Cooper were saying the same thing about the crowd support which had been there at the Salt Lake Stadium, and we have witnessed what happened in the Brazil versus German game. So as an English, what do you think? How much a difference that ambience can make in the big semi-final?
Well, it was a wonderful atmosphere the other evening, and Carlos Amadeo was absolutely right. But Steve Cooper's right as well when he says coming back here to Calcutta, where they played their first 4 games, remember, was terrific. And yet even now, this is going to be bigger still. And if you remember Paulinho before the Brazil-Germany game, he said he'd played in front of 40,000 before, but never 60,000. And I think it's wonderful that both coaches have stressed the fact that this is a wonderful stadium here in Salt Lake now. You know, I've been coming here for many years when it wasn't a wonderful stadium. It was an old stadium. It was a little bit grubby, to be honest with you. But now it is a fabulous edifice. 66,000 people, and every one of those players will never, ever forget playing in a semi-final and maybe a final here in Calcutta.
But if it comes in terms of the plannings and the strategies of both the team's perspective, both the coach's perspective, what do you think? What would be the areas where both the coaches want to exploit in the big game?
Well, I think the Brazilian coach, for a start, will say we have to defend early against England. If you can frustrate England like the Japanese did for half an hour, for 40 minutes or whatever, then you have a chance. The English coach, they played Brazil last year in a friendly match and it ended 0-0. So they both know one another inside out. In fact, there were only 3 changes in the entire squads from that match. So in terms of strategy, Steve Cooper will just want his team to play as they have been doing. He'll be thinking about substitutions early second half probably, because for me, he's got more strength on the bench than the Brazilian coach, and that has been proved because most of the Brazilian substitutes have played a very limited amount of football out here in India, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, where a lot of the England substitutes have played a game and a half, 2 games in some cases. People like Angel Gomez, for example, you know, I mean, he's a top player from Manchester United, and he's not had a lot of game time, but he's had enough to make an impact and to score 2 goals. So they'll both want to play the way they want to play, and they will both try and impose their style on the opposition.
Well, you cancelled out to make any comment if it comes in terms of the prediction in the last game. Brazil versus England. Do you think, I'm not going to ask you about the prediction because I know that you'd be saying no prediction. But do you think if there is one team who can beat Brazil in this FIFA U17 World Cup, that is England? Yes,
I think that England, because I'm English, it'd be heresy if I ever said I didn't think England were going to win. And I do think they can win. There's absolutely no question about it. Equally, Brazil can win as well. Spain might give Brazil a few problems. Mali, I don't think so, to be honest with you. But we don't know who's going to win in the other semi-final as well yet either. But it doesn't matter who Brazil play in a final, you'd always back Brazil in the final. Not in a semi-final, as we saw in their own country tragically 3 years ago. But in a final, you would never back against Brazil. As I said the other night, you would never back against Germany. But I think England has a real chance. They do have a real chance.
Well, thanks a lot, John. That was John Helm for you, as conspicuous as ever, and absolutely speculative as well as analytical in all the aspects which would be coming to an account, to be precise, in the big game at the Salt Lake Stadium, Kolkata. Hit the subscribe option and the bell icon to get all the exclusive sports videos on Extra Time.